An infamous date to recall. Friday, October the 13th in the year 1307. The night of the long knives, you might say. Our theme is the Knights Templars, an intriguing look at an order that stretches back to the 1300 period and gave birth eventually to our present banking system. It's intriguing because of its Christian context. After the First Crusade captured Jerusalem in the year 1099, many Christian pilgrims travelled to visit what they referred to as the holy places. The holy pilgrimages began even earlier than that. The idea was that if you attended a holy place or visited the remnant of some bygone, very important religious person, you would have more points against your credit when you arrived in heaven. Of course, that has phased out over the years, but at that point in time, it was highly thought probable. However, though the city of Jerusalem was under relatively secure control, the rest of the area was not, and bandits abounded, and pilgrims were routinely slaughtered, sometimes by the hundreds, as they attempted to make this holy journey from the coastland of Jaffa into the Holy Land and onto the site, the holy site in question. Around 1119, two veterans of the First Crusade, the French knight Payens and relatively Godfrey the Saint Omer, proposed the creation of a monastic order for the protection of these travelling pilgrims. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem agreed to this request and gave them space for a headquarters on the very Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Also, they were allowed to stay at the captured El Aqsa Mosque. The Temple Mount was full of mystique because it was above what was to be believed to be the ruins of the original Temple of Solomon. The Crusaders therefore preferred the El Aqsa Mosque as, and often referred to it as the Solomon's Temple, and it was preferred as their headquarters. And it was from this location that the order took the name the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, or Templar Knights. Again, I would say that the Templar Knights were soldiers of heroic consequence who made sure that those pilgrims travelling to the temple site in the Holy Land were safe and secure. Incidentally, a seal of the Knights Templar with their famous image of two knights on a single horse were a symbol of their early poverty. The order, with about 9 knights, had few financial resources at the beginning and relied on donations to survive. However, the founding knights soon began to gather other adherents to their cause. With a formal blessing, the Templars became a highly favoured charity throughout Christendom, receiving money and land and businesses and noble-born sons from families who were eager to help with the fight in the Holy Land. Another major benefit came in 1139 when Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull accepting the order from obedience to local laws. This ruling meant that the Templars could pass freely through all borders but were not required to pay any taxes and were exempt from all authority except that of the Pope. With its clear mission and ample resources, the Templar order
Christian
grew
knights
rapidly.
are not
particularly linked in the later stages just with the Knights Templars. Christian soldier knights go back to the days of King Arthur and the Round Table. Heavily armoured Christian knights on their war horses would set out to charge at the enemy in an attempt to break through the opposition lines. One of their most famous victories was in 1177, when during the Battle of Montesgard some 500 Templar knights helped to defeat Saladin's army of more than 26,000 soldiers. Although the primary mission of the order was military, relatively few members were combatant. Assisted the knights, others acted and managed to do all the financial infrastructure. The Templar order, though its members were sworn to individual poverty, were given control of wealth. As one legend has proposed, it is probable, that when the Knights Templars brought their royals to the temple site, that they were also looking for the temple treasure that was missing during the time of the Titus attack on Jerusalem, AD 68 to 70. It was proposed that under the temple site itself would be caverns or pathways that would be ideal for hiding the treasures from the temple. That's why Titus and the Roman soldiers that eventually took the temple site could not find the treasures. Did indeed the Knights Templars find those treasures? Now that's been the source of investigation over many years, and the Renault Chateau incident emphasises this possibility. The series Chronicles, published by the BBC, brought to light an event at Renault Chateau which is still under consideration today. What happened there was that a temple, which was a miniature form of the original Solomon temple, had been built in Renault Chateau. Two pillars within the temple, which they thought was solid marble, suddenly one began to disintegrate, and out came sand and the contents that were there, and they discovered that this particular temple structure was covered by a veneer rather than being of a solid substance. When the interior began to fall out, they noticed a parchment. When the parchment was translated, they discovered it told where the Knights Templars had hidden the treasure that was put there in the marble or so-called marble slab at the time of the erection of the temple. This pointed the way to where some of the treasure taken from the treasure site in Jerusalem had been hidden, in the area of Renault Chateau. The priest ordered the villagers to keep everything quiet. This they did, and the priest used the finances from the treasure to reupholster, as it were, the village itself. And this was a most remarkable situation. A poor French village suddenly became quite a rich French village. And the secrets were kept from generation to generation until recent times. Could that be an added proof that at some point during the period of the 200 years and more of the Knights Templars, they had indeed discovered some of the temple treasure under the temple site? Now, as I've said, one of their most famous victories when it came to great battles was in 1177, when Saladin's army was severely defeated. And although the Templar order was sworn to individual poverty, and they had wealth beyond any direct donations, it is interesting to note that in participating in the Crusades, one might place all his assets under temple management, particularly while the royals were away, that is, those who were fighting for the Templar cause. Accumulating wealth in this manner throughout Christendom, the order in 1150 began generating letters of credit for pilgrims journeying to the Holy Land, where pilgrims deposited their valuables with a local Templar preceptory before embarking, receiving a document indicating the value of their deposit, then use that document upon arrival in the Holy Land to retrieve their funds. This arrangement surely was an early form of banking, and may have been the first formal system to support the use of cheques, which are still in use in banking to this very day. And of course, such provision would make the pilgrims less attractive target for thieves, and it also, of course, contributed to the Templar coffers. Based on this mixture of donations and business dealing, the Templars established financial networks across the whole of Christendom. They acquired large tracts of land both in Europe and in the Middle East. They bought and managed farms and vineyards. They built churches and castles. They were involved in manufacturing, import and export. They had their own fleet of ships, and at one point they even owned the entire island of Cyprus. The Order of the Knights Templars arguably qualifies as the world's first multinational
October the
corporation.
13th, 1307, a date sometimes linked with the origin of Friday the 13th in its superstition. King Philip ordered de Molay, who was of course the Grand Master of the French Templars at that time, along with other Templars, to be simultaneously arrested. Now the Templars were charged with numerous offences, including apostasy, idolatry, heresy, obscene rituals and homosexuality, financial corruption and fraud and secrecy. Many of the accused were tortured to confess these charges, and these confessions, even though obtained under duress, caused a scandal in Paris. Eventually Pope Clement called for papal hearings to determine the Templars' guilt or innocence, and once freed of the Inquisitor's torture, many Templars recanted their confessions. Some had sufficient legal experience to defend themselves in trials, but in 1310 Philip blocked this attempt, using the previously forced confessions to have dozens of Templars burnt at the stake in Paris. Now, with Philip demanding action from the Pope and putting pressure upon him, we understand at this point that Pope Clement finally agreed to disband the Order of the Templars. And at a council of Vienna in 1312, he issued a papal bull including some of the details which officially dissolved the order. Now, as for the leaders of the order, the elderly Grand Master Jacques de Molay, who had confessed under torture, retracted his statement, and his associate Geoffrey de Charny, preceptor of Normandy, followed de Molay's example and insisted on his